The yellow bulb flickered to life as Hannah twisted it into the socket above her front door. Her hands were still shaking from the telegram she'd received that morning. Her husband James was missing somewhere in the Pacific. The war had swallowed him whole, and nobody could tell her if he was alive or dead. She stood on that wooden porch and made herself a promise. That light would burn every single night until James walked back through her door. She didn't care what the neighbors thought. She didn't care about the electric bill. That light was hope made visible, and she would tend it like a sacred flame. The October wind picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the porch boards. Hannah pulled her sweater tight and looked down the empty dirt road that led away from her small Tennessee farmhouse. Nothing moved out there except the shadows of clouds racing across the fields. She thought about James the last time she'd seen him, standing in his crisp uniform at the train station, promising he'd be home before she knew it. That was 18 months ago. The war was over now, but James was still gone. Inside the house, the silence felt thick enough to choke on. Hannah's sister Margaret showed up the next morning with a basket of eggs and a mouth full of opinions. "You can't keep that porch light burning all night," Margaret said, setting the basket on the kitchen table harder than necessary. "People are starting to talk." Hannah poured coffee into 2 chipped cups without looking up. "Let them talk. It's wasteful, Hannah. The war's over. If James was coming home, he'd be here by now." The words hung in the air like smoke. Hannah's hand trembled as she set down the coffee pot, but her voice stayed steady. "The War Office said he's missing. Missing isn't dead." Margaret sighed the way she always did when she thought Hannah was being foolish. "Missing for over a year, honey. You have to face facts. Thomas says." "I don't care what Thomas says." Hannah finally met her sister's eyes. "James is my husband, not his, and that light stays on." Margaret opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She'd seen that look on Hannah's face before. It was the same look their mama had when she decided something, the kind of stubborn that couldn't be reasoned with or worn down. They drank their coffee in uncomfortable silence while the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled up against the porch railings, and ice made the wooden steps treacherous. Hannah bundled up every evening to replace the bulb when it burned out, which happened more frequently in the cold. She kept a box of replacement bulbs in the hall closet, lined up like soldiers standing at attention. The neighbors had stopped commenting on the light directly. "That's good," he said, surprising her. "That's real good. You keep it burning, girl. Stranger things have happened." He drove away before she could respond, leaving Hannah standing in the snow with tears freezing on her cheeks. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Hannah planted her garden the same way she always had, with James's old work gloves on her hands because hers had worn through. She put in tomatoes and beans and squash, enough for 2 people even though she was only feeding one. Margaret visited less often now. She'd given up trying to convince Hannah to give up the light, but the disappointment sat between them like an uninvited guest. Thomas had told Margaret to leave her sister alone, to let her grieve in her own way. That's what everyone thought this was now. Grief. An extended mourning for a man who wasn't coming back. But Hannah knew better. She could feel it in her bones, the way some people could feel rain coming. James was alive somewhere. Maybe he couldn't remember who he was. Maybe he was injured and recovering in some faraway hospital. Maybe he was trying to find his way home and it was just taking longer than anyone expected. The light would guide him when he got close. She believed that with every fiber of her being. On the first truly warm day of spring, a stranger came walking up the road. Hannah was weeding her garden when she noticed him, a thin figure in ragged clothes moving slowly, like every step hurt. Her heart jumped into her throat. She stood up so fast she nearly fell over. But as he got closer, she could see it wasn't James. This man was older, with gray in his beard and a limp that favored his left side. The stranger stopped at the end of her driveway and raised one hand in greeting. Hannah wiped the dirt from her hands onto her apron and walked toward him slowly, disappointment settling heavy in her chest. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "I've been walking for 2 days. Could I trouble you for some water?" Hannah studied his face. There was something broken in his eyes, something that reminded her of stray dogs who'd been kicked too many times. "Wait here," she said. She brought him water in a mason jar and watched him drink it down in desperate gulps. When he finished, he handed the jar back with hands that shook. "Thank you kindly," he said. "I saw your light last night. Guided me for the last 5 miles. Hannah felt her throat tighten. "You walking home?" "Trying to. I was in a hospital ship in California. Took me this long to get my head straight enough to remember where home was." He looked down at his feet. "Hoping my wife kept the house. Hoping she's still there." "Where's home?" Hannah asked. "Cookeville. Another 20 miles north." He swayed slightly, and Hannah realized he was in no condition to walk another 20 miles. "You'll stay for supper," she said firmly, "and sleep in the barn tonight. You can set out fresh in the morning." The man's eye, it wasn't a question. "My husband," Hannah said quietly. "He's been missing since 44. Robert nodded slowly. "The missing ones are the hardest. At least with the dead, you know. With missing, you're stuck in this awful place between hope and grief, and you can't move forward because you can't let go of the possibility." "I won't let go," Hannah said fiercely. "He's out there somewhere. I know he is." Robert met her eyes across the table. "Then you keep that light burning. You keep it burning until you know for certain, one way or another. Don't let anyone tell you that hope is foolish. Hope is the only thing that got me through those camps. Hope is the only thing getting me home." They sat together in the lamplight, 2 people holding on to hope with bloody fingers, refusing to let the darkness win. In the morning, Hannah made Robert a big breakfast and packed him food for the road. She also gave him a $10 bill she could barely afford to spare. "For when you get to Cookeville," she said. "In case you need anything before you find your wife." Robert tried to refuse, but Hannah pressed it into his hand. "Pay it forward someday," she said. "Help someone else who's trying to find their way home." She watched him walk up the road until he disappeared over the hill. Then she went back to her garden and her chickens and her routines. The light would burn again that night and the night after and all the nights that followed. Word of Robert's visit spread through town somehow, the way news always did in small places. The story changed as it traveled. Some people said Hannah was taking in drifters. Others said she was helping veterans find their way home. A few said she was running some kind of way station for the lost and broken. All of it was true in a way. That summer, 3 more men stopped at Hannah's house, drawn by the porch light like moths to a flame. She fed them all, gave them a place to sleep, and sent them on their way with provisions and hope. None of them were James, but she helped them anyway because it was what she would want someone to do for her husband if he was out there wandering, trying to find his way back. Margaret heard about it, of course, and came storming over on a hot July afternoon. "Have you lost your mind?" Margaret demanded, standing in Hannah's kitchen with her hands on her hips. "You're letting strange men sleep in your barn? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" Hannah continued shelling peas, her hands moving in the steady rhythm she'd learned from their mother. "They're not dangerous. They're soldiers trying to get home. You don't know that. They could be criminals. They could be lying to you. They're not lying." Hannah's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I can see it in their eyes, Margaret. They're broken boys who've seen too much death. They just need a little help." "What you need is help," Margaret snapped. "Everyone in town thinks you've gone crazy with grief. They're taking bets on when you'll finally accept that James is dead and turn off that damned light." Hannah's hands stilled. She looked up at her sister with eyes that had gone cold and hard. "Get out." "Hannah," I said, "get out. And don't come back until you can talk about my husband with some respect." Margaret left, and the screen door slammed behind her like a gunshot. Hannah sat alone at her kitchen table. She'd helped 14 men make it home by the spring of 1949. Some sent her letters afterward, thanking her, telling her they'd made it, that their families had taken them back despite the nightmares and the shaking hands. One sent her a photograph of his new baby, named Hannah after the woman who'd given him hope when he'd run out. She kept those letters in a box under her bed and read them when the loneliness got too heavy. They reminded her that light in the darkness mattered, even if her own darkness never lifted. The town had stopped gossiping about her, mostly. She'd become part of the landscape, like the old oak tree in the town square or the covered bridge over Miller's Creek. Crazy Hannah with her porch light, waiting for a ghost. Children dared each other to run up and touch her mailbox. Teenagers told stories about her on Halloween, turning her into something close to a legend. Hannah didn't care. She had her routines and her light and her stubborn, unshakable hope. Then one morning in October of 1949, a government car pulled into her driveway. Hannah saw them coming from her kitchen window. Two men in dark suits, walking with the careful solemnity of people bearing bad news. Her heart, which had been beating steadily for 5 years, suddenly felt like it might break through her ribs. She met them at the door before they could knock. "Mrs. Hannah Wright?" the taller one asked. "Yes. I'm Agent Morrison from the War Department. This is Agent Pierce. May we come in?" Hannah's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. "Is this about my husband?" "Yes, ma'am. Perhaps we should sit down." They sat in her small living room, the same room where she'd sat with Robert and all the other broken soldiers who'd come through. Agent Morrison pulled a folder from his briefcase and opened it carefully. "Mrs. Wright, we've been conducting an ongoing investigation into missing servicemen from the Pacific Theater. I'm afraid we've confirmed that your husband, Sergeant James Wright, was killed in action on October 8, 1944. The words hit her like a physical blow. Hannah heard them, understood them, but they didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense because James wasn't dead. She would know if James was dead. She would feel it. "You're wrong," she whispered. Agent Morrison's face was kind but firm. "I understand this is difficult. We have statements from 2 members of his unit who witnessed the event. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Wright. Where is his body?" The agents exchanged glances. Agent Pierce spoke for the first time. "He was buried at sea, ma'am. It was common practice when—" "Then you don't know for certain." Hannah stood up abruptly. "If there's no body, you can't know for certain. Mrs. Wright, get out." Her voice was shaking now, but steady underneath. "Get out of—" "They told me their theory," Hannah said, not looking at her sister. She was sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun go down. "Hannah, honey, it's not a theory. They have witnesses. They have documentation. James is gone. He's been gone for 5 years. Then where's his body? He was buried at sea. They told you that." "Convenient," Hannah said bitterly. "Real convenient how there's never any proof. Just papers and second-hand stories." Margaret sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "What would it take?" she asked quietly. "What would it take for you to accept this and move on?" Hannah was quiet for a long time. The sun was painting the sky orange and pink, the same colors it had been the last night she'd seen James. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I'll wait until I'm old and gray and dying, and then I'll finally know for sure when I see him on the other side." "That's not living, Hannah. That's just existing. It's my existence. My choice." They sat together as darkness fell and the porch light flickered on above them, casting its small circle of hope into the vast, indifferent night. The town's attitude toward Hannah shifted after the government men came. The pity got thicker, more cloying. People stopped mentioning James entirely, like he'd never existed at all. They talked around him, about the weather and crops and everything except the obvious truth. Hannah was a widow who refused to accept her widowhood. But the soldiers still came. Not as many as before, but 1 or 2 every few months. Men who'd been held as prisoners of war and took years to make it home. Men who'd lost their memories and spent years in hospitals trying to piece themselves back together. Men who'd been declared dead but weren't. Hannah helped every single one of them. She fed them and sheltered them and sent them home with her blessing. And every single one of them proved that sometimes the ones everyone thought were dead came walking back into the light. In the spring of 1950, a man named Thomas stopped at her house. He'd been declared dead in 1945, but had actually been in a Soviet prison camp in Siberia. It took him 5 years to escape, steal his way across Russia, and make it back to American soil. When he told his story, sitting at Hannah's kitchen table with tears running down his face. She knew that Margaret would never understand what it meant. "My wife remarried," Thomas said. "Got a letter from my mother telling me. She thought I was dead. Everyone thought I was dead." "Are you going to tell her you're alive?" Hannah asked. "I don't know. Maybe it's better if she thinks I stayed dead. She has a new life now. A new husband. Maybe even children by now." He looked at Hannah with eyes that held too much pain. "How do you come back from the dead without destroying everything?" Hannah didn't have an answer for that. She just refilled his coffee and sat with him in his grief. Years continued to pass in their slow, inexorable way. 1950 became 1955, then 1960. Hannah turned 40, then 45. The porch light burned on, and she replaced it faithfully every time the bulb died. She'd gone through hundreds of bulbs by now, maybe thousands. She'd lost count. Her hair was more gray than dark now. Her hands were rough and calloused from all the work of keeping the farm running alone. She'd sold off most of the land because she couldn't maintain it by herself, keeping only the house and a small garden plot. She took in sewing to make ends meet, sitting on her porch in good weather with her needle flashing in and out of fabric while the light burned above her. Margaret had died in 1958, sudden and shocking from a heart attack. Hannah held her sister's hand as she passed, and Margaret's last words were, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you." Hannah never knew what— "Mrs. Wright," he said, sitting across from her on the porch. "You've been keeping this light on for 19 years now. Do you really still believe your husband is alive?" Hannah looked at him with eyes that had seen 19 years of disappointment but hadn't lost their hope. "I believe that miracles happen," she said carefully. "I've seen boys come home who everyone swore were dead. I've seen men find their way back from places no one thought they could return from. So yes, I still believe. But after 19 years, don't you think?" "I think that love doesn't have an expiration date," Hannah interrupted. "I think that hope is worth holding on to even when everyone else has let go. And I think that light matters, even if the person you're lighting it for never sees it. Because other people see it. Other people find their way home because of it." The reporter scribbled in his notebook. "How many men would you say you've helped?" "I stopped counting years ago. Dozens, at least. And none of them were your husband." "No," Hannah admitted. "None of them were James. But they were someone's husband, someone's son, someone's father. They mattered to somebody. So helping them mattered too." The article ran in the Nashville paper with a photograph of Hannah standing on her porch, the light glowing above her head like a halo. The headline read, "The Eternal Light, One Woman's 20-Year Vigil." The article brought more visitors. People drove out from Nashville and Knoxville and even as far as Memphis to see the porch light and the woman who tended it. Some came out of genuine curiosity. Others came because they were carrying their own grief and wanted to meet someone who understood. A few came because they thought Hannah was crazy and wanted to see the spectacle for themselves. Hannah received them all with the same quiet dignity. She didn't preach or philosophize. She just told her story and let people make of it what they would. A woman named Sarah came in the fall of 1964. She was young, maybe 30, with a baby on her hip and exhaustion in her eyes. "My husband went to Vietnam," Sarah said, standing at the bottom of Hannah's porch steps. "He's been missing for 6 months. Everyone keeps telling me to accept that he's gone. But I can't. I just can't." Hannah came down the steps and took the baby from Sarah's arms, settling the child on her own hip like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Come inside," she said. "Let me make you some coffee." They sat at Hannah's kitchen table for 3 hours. Hannah told her about James, about the waiting, about the men who'd found their way home after everyone else had given up. She told her about the cost of hope, how it wore you down and built you up in equal measure. "I won't lie to you," Hannah said. "The waiting is the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than losing him would have been, in some ways, because you never get to stop grieving. You're always in this liminal space between loss and hope." "But you kept going," Sarah said. "I kept going. And you'll keep going too because that's what we do. We keep the light on. We keep hoping. And if they never come home, at least we'll know we never gave up on them." Sarah left with red eyes but a straighter spine. She sent Hannah a letter every month for the next 2 years, updates on her life and her continued vigil. Then the letters stopped. Hannah never knew if that meant Sarah's husband came home or if she'd finally accepted he was gone. Hannah turned 50 in 1965. She marked the occasion alone. With a small cake she baked herself and a single candle that she blew out while the porch light burned on above her. 21 years now. James had been gone longer than they'd been married. She looked at herself in the mirror that night and barely recognized the woman staring back. When had she gotten so old? When had the girl who'd married James Wright transformed into this weathered, gray-haired stranger? But her eyes were the same. Still that same stubborn hope burning in them like an ember that refused to go out. She went to bed that night and dreamed of James for the first time in years. In the dream, he was walking up her road, young and whole and smiling. But every time he got close to the house, he'd fade away like morning mist, and she'd wake up crying. The dreams continued night after night. James walking toward her. James disappearing before he reached her. Hannah began to dread sleep, but she was so tired she couldn't stay awake forever. One morning, she woke up and realized she couldn't remember what James's voice sounded like. She sat up in bed, gripping the sheets in panic, trying to pull the sound of it from her memory. But it was gone, worn away by 21 years of silence. She went to the small box where she kept his letters from the war. She read them all, trying to hear his voice in the words. But they were just words on paper now. The man who'd written them was a ghost, and ghosts didn't speak. For the first time since she'd turned on the porch light in 1944, Hannah wondered if everyone else had been right all along. She didn't turn off the light. She couldn't bring herself to do it, even in her moment of doubt. But something had shifted inside her. The hope felt different now, less like a living thing and more like a habit she couldn't break. Winter came, brutal and cold. Ice storms knocked out the power for 3 days, and Hannah sat in her dark, freezing house with blankets wrapped around her shoulders, watching the porch light stay dark because there was no electricity to feed it. When the power came back on, she stood on the porch and cried while the light flickered back to life. A neighbor boy named Danny had started coming by to help with chores. He was 16 and earnest, with his father's kindness and his mother's determination. He shoveled her walk and carried firewood and fixed the loose boards on her porch steps without being asked. "Why do you do all this for me?" Hannah asked him one afternoon. Danny shrugged, embarrassed. "My grandpa was one of the soldiers you helped, back in 47. Maybe that's all it takes sometimes. Just someone showing you kindness when you're lost." Danny looked up at the porch light. "Do you really think he's still alive? Your husband?" Hannah was quiet for a long time. "I don't know anymore," she finally admitted. "But I know I can't stop waiting. Not yet." "When will you stop?" "I guess I'll know when the time comes." The time didn't come. 1966 became 1967, then 1968. The country changed around Hannah while she stayed frozen in her vigil. Civil rights marches and assassinations and a new war in a place called Vietnam that was eating up young men the same way the last war had. Danny got drafted in the spring of 1968. He came to say goodbye to Hannah before he left, standing on her porch in his uniform that looked too big for his thin frame. "Promise me you'll come back," Hannah said, and her voice broke on the words. "I promise," Danny said. "I'll write you every week." He kept his promise for 6 months. Then the letters stopped. Hannah stood on her porch every evening, watching the road, waiting for Danny now as much as she waited for James. 2 vigils running parallel, 2 lights burning in her heart. In October of 1968, Danny's mother came to Hannah's door with a telegram in her shaking hands. "Missing in action." The same words that had started Hannah's long wait 24 years ago. They sat together on Hannah's porch and cried. Danny's mother looked at the light burning above them and said, "Will you keep it on for him too? Will you keep it on for my boy?" "I'll keep it on," Hannah promised. "I'll keep it on for all of them." And she did. The light burned for James and for Danny and for all the boys who'd gone to war. "I thought about your light," Danny told Hannah, sitting on her porch steps. "When things got real bad over there, I thought about how you were still waiting after all these years, and it helped. It reminded me that someone would be waiting for me too. I'm so glad you made it home, Hannah said, and meant it with her whole heart. He might still come, Danny said quietly. You're James. I know it's been a long time, but stranger things have happened. I'm proof of that. Hannah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. 26 years now. I've been waiting 26 years. That's a long time. It is. But I don't know how to stop. They sat together in companionable silence. Two people who understood the cost of hope and the weight of waiting. The years kept passing. 1970 became 1975, then 1980. Hannah turned 60, then 65. Her hands shook now when she changed the light bulb. Her knees hurt when she climbed the ladder. But she climbed it anyway, every time the bulb burned out because the alternative was unthinkable. The farm had fallen into disrepair. The barn was leaning dangerously, and the fences were mostly gone. Hannah lived on Social Security and the kindness of neighbors who brought her casseroles and firewood and helped with repairs she could no longer do herself. Danny came by every week, bringing groceries and checking on her. He'd gotten married and had two little girls who called Hannah Grandma, even though they shared no blood. His wife Emma was kind and patient, never commenting on the porch light that burned day and night. You should come live with us, Danny suggested on a cold winter day in 1984. We have that extra room. You could be comfortable. I can't leave, Hannah said. What if he comes home and I'm not here? Hannah. Danny's voice was gentle. He's been gone 40 years. 40 years. I know how long it's been. Her voice was sharp, then softened. I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help. But this house is where he'll look for me. I have to be here. Danny didn't argue. He just made sure her heat was working and her pantry was stocked and the bulbs for the porch light were in easy reach. In 1989, Hannah turned 75. She was frail now, her body worn down by years of work and worry and waiting. She moved slowly through her house, each step deliberate and careful. A journalist came that spring, working on a story about devoted war widows. She was young and sharp, with quick eyes and a recorder that she set on Hannah's kitchen table. Do you ever regret it? The journalist asked. All this time waiting? Hannah thought about the question carefully. I regret that I had to wait, she finally said. I regret that James went to war and never came back. I regret all the years we lost together. But do I regret waiting for him? No, because the waiting was my choice. It was the only thing I had control over. The war took James from me, but it couldn't take away my right to wait for him. But he's been gone 45 years. I know. And you still believe he's alive? Hannah was quiet for a long time. The journalist waited, recorder running, capturing every second of silence. I don't know what I believe anymore, Hannah finally admitted. But I know I love him. And I know that love doesn't end just because someone's been gone a long time. So I keep the light on. For him. For me. For everyone who needs to see that some people don't give up. The article ran in a women's magazine with a photograph of Hannah standing under her porch light, looking impossibly old and impossibly young at the same time. Winter came hard in 1989, the coldest winter anyone could remember, with snow that piled up past Hannah's windows and wind that rattled the old house like it wanted to tear it down. Hannah stayed inside, wrapped in blankets, keeping the fire burning and the light on. She'd fallen twice that year. Once in the garden, once in the hallway. Nothing had broken, but it scared her. She was alone so much of the time now. What if she fell and couldn't get up? What if she died alone in this house? And James came home to find her body. The thought haunted her through the long winter nights. In February, she caught pneumonia. Danny found her delirious with fever, burning up in her cold bed because the fire had gone out. He carried her to his truck and drove her to the hospital in Cookeville, her thin body light as a bird in his arms. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness. In her fever dreams, James came to visit her. He sat beside her bed and held her hand and told her it was okay to rest now. But she couldn't tell if it was really him or just her dying brain trying to give her peace. When the fever broke and Hannah opened her eyes, Emma was sitting beside her bed. "The light, Hannah,"